Let's do it.
Let's do it. So it's 7:02 due to technical considerations, and I call to order Town of Bedford Finance Committee meeting for January 29th, 2026. We'll start with roll call. Vincent?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
I'm here. Tom?
Here.
Ellen?
Here.
And Mark?
Here.
And then Karen and Ben are absent and let me know earlier, so unfortunately they won't be here tonight. So kicking things off, we'll start with public comment. 3 minutes per commenter. So we'll start with that. Maybe start with people in the room. Anyone want to comment? All right. Seeing none, I'll close public comment and go to the next agenda item, which is the annual town meeting warrant. I think there's no votes or anything on that tonight, but I wanted to have this on here to just highlight to everyone that it is now in the Dropbox. The select board, if you watched any of that on Monday night, they're still going through and adjudicating bits of the warrant, but it's a large warrant this year. It's 29 articles to date, and so which there may be a little bit more, so I encourage everyone to take a look at it. I think once we get through budget, the plan, as I've discussed with Ben, is that we'll get into reviewing that kind of at length as we've kind of typically do, and hopefully can buzz through it pretty quickly in the month of February. Luckily, we don't have some of the print deadlines we had last year, so that's helpful. So any comments on the warrant or questions or considerations that I could take back to Matt while we're having this discussion?
Nope.
All right. It's easy enough. So with that, we're moving right along. We'll move into task number 4, which is the school FY27 budget presentation. So Cliff, Julie, do you guys want to come on up?
Sure.
And do you have something you want to present?
We can. It's Julie's logging into the finance committee Zoom, so then whoever's managing it can share. I did print some. You got one? Hard copies?
Thanks, sir.
Oh, nice.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
And Vincent, you should have it online. Or it should.
Yeah, how about that to the job?
Great. Thanks.
Recording in progress.
And let's see. Yeah. Can you promote Julie to, or whatever you're logged in as, to panelists? Yeah. Okay. Great, thank you. And then we will share. Can you also enable multiple participant sharing? Usually under share and then says multiple, yeah. Wait, where is it? So my apologies with the quick turnaround. This is the same presentation that we shared with the committee, the school committee, a few nights ago in this very room. But the committee approved this as proposed, so all of the content is identical. Do you remember how to make it big screen?
Yep.
Zoom.
Huh.
Zoom full width.
Hold on.
Oh, you're opened inside the window. You have to open it with.
Yeah.
I think we can maybe manage. Hold on.
Vincent, can you see this well?
Did you download?
Yeah, that works.
I did. You
Works
have
for
to.
me.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, we'll just.
This
let
is
you know.
not perfect, but the format
Oh.
is. Yeah, we'll just deal with this. All right, so this budget proposal is designed to support our strategic plan that boosts, promotes, and strengthens our system. So in terms of the top line summary, the request that the school committee approved on Tuesday evening was $53,697,409, which represents a 3.08% increase from our current fiscal 26 approved budget, which is just over $1.6 million increase in absolute dollars. This does rely on the use of 2 tiers of reductions and changes, along with a new revenue tier and some reliance on the Special Ed Stabilization Fund, which we'll talk about in a bit. The bigger picture context is that we are in a declining enrollment scenario. We have been for many years, and we will be for many years to come. And it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are right-sizing our resource footprint with the number of students that we're serving. So this is a continued effort to ensure that the taxpayer dollars that go to support our excellent school system are allocated in a sustainable way. As I think we shared with you when we came earlier this fall, the budget process starts with an analysis of maintenance of effort, which is what would it cost to just continue the infrastructure as currently stands, which includes keeping all staff, inflating the salaries by the contractual commitments that we've made, and also going through all the other costs that include contractual adjustments and our best guess estimates, and that did result in a maintenance of effort level of just over $4 million of additional funding, or 7.7% increase. As this committee well knows, the town has invested very strategically in the schools over the past 2 years, 6% in fiscal 24, in order to address our literacy program, among other high priority items. And then last year, for this, as well as the teacher contract settlement, and in fiscal 26, the increase was a 5% increase. We knew coming into this budget season that that was not a sustainable level of increase, and so we began working from the 7.7% figure to bring it down to something that we think is more sustainable for the town, and also preserves our current service profile for students. So in summary, we are the school committee approved 3 tiers of changes. Tier 1, which we recommended strongly because it takes advantage of efficiencies and vacancies, and does not require any layoffs, and does not impact core student programming. Tier 2, we presented as something that had to be considered, additional reductions that unfortunately may involve layoffs, though we still have some time to potentially capture efficiencies and vacancies in the next several months. And it also still preserves student programming, though in Tier 2 there may be some upward pressure on class sizes, particularly at the secondary level, and most definitely there will be impact on staff team structures in order to execute the changes in a way that minimizes the impact on students. And third, we are proposing a revenue tier with new adjusted fees in order to offset the need for additional reductions. We believe that the Tier 2 reductions are about as much as we can cut in 1 year without beginning to impact student programming. As you may know, we did consider fees last year. Last year, the focus of fees was on our busing system. But the committee decided that that wasn't something they wanted to pursue. This year we took another look at the fee structure and decided that the most equitable approach was to take a look at activity fees, with a confidential fee waiver process and a commitment to ensure that student participation would not be impacted. Unlike transportation fees, which could in fact actually change the profile of students who might take the bus or increase traffic on the road, we believe the fee structure for activities will not significantly impact other aspects of the community, and that we can, through ensuring the fee waivers, that the participant rates don't suffer. We're also proposing a modest fee for parking at BHS, with the proviso again that everyone can take the free bus transportation system to school if they so choose, and then a very small voluntary device insurance fee in order to make more universal our ability to manage the devices that are issued by the schools. And then I'll talk about the stabilization fund usage in a bit. So in summary, Tier 1 right now is looking at savings, a net savings of about $1 million, and a net FTE reduction of 11.5 positions that we believe we can achieve without any layoffs. However, we want to be clear that this does not mean that teachers or other staff may not be reassigned. It is our hope to prioritize voluntary transfers and shifts as much as possible. However, we do believe we can avoid anyone losing their job in this Tier 1 set of reductions. We're also looking at bus fleet efficiencies and some other operating efficiencies, and adding one position which is mission critical with respect to our special education program, and a cost avoidance measure to avoid more costly out-of-district tuition, and then a very modest investment in some additional software for our language-based program at Lane School, again, to avoid the potential for more costly out-of-district tuition. I already said all that. I already said all that too, sorry. Tier 2 is the tougher tier. We believe these reductions can be responsibly made. However, at this point, we do project that it may require 6 FTE layoffs. It will save us an additional net $577,000. In this tier, we are adding a partial FTE to address a strategic need related to math intervention, as well as to continue a successful counseling service that we were able to start up in the last 2 years with grant funding. Those modest adds will allow us to offset potentially some job loss with that additional FTE, 0.6 FTE, but in total, there's still maybe a net reduction of 6 FTE. As I said before, however, we believe we can make these reductions without impacting core student programming. The core of this core student programming, but this is about as far as we can go before that impact starts to be felt in terms of what students, what opportunities students might have in terms of courses and activities. And so accordingly, we look to revenue to close the remainder of the gap. These estimates are conservative estimates based on a very careful analysis of current activities, student participation activities. We iterated on this, I think, 3 times with the committee and feedback from the community, 4 times. So we've landed on a secondary-only fee, an all-access approach. Unlike the surrounding districts or most districts, this is pretty unique in the sense that once you pay the fee, you can have access to all the activities. We are proposing 2 levels based on some feedback. One, which is all access at the $400 level, and then for the less resource-intensive clubs, if someone is not participating in the larger activities, they can pay $150. We will be working out the kinks in terms of the administrative process, but we are strongly committed to ensuring that participation rates do not go down. We have a lot of evidence that this will be the case because, contrary to popular belief, we are not entirely fee-free as a district. In fact, most middle school families pay more than $2,000 over the course of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to participate in Nature's Classroom and the DC trip, which is actually more than 4 years of high school activities at $400 a year. And we have successfully been able to support students who whose families may not be able to pay that fee through scholarship processes, fundraising. So I'm highly confident that the community will be able to continue to support that all access regardless of ability to pay. And I mentioned the 2 other small fees with similar commitments to ensuring that there's no one who will be denied access because of ability to pay. Probably of most interest is our planned use of special education stabilization funds. As you may know from 2 years ago, we advocated for and successfully got permission from the town to establish the stabilization fund at $300,000. Last year, we were successfully able to secure town approval for an additional $350,000 into the fund. The purpose of this fund is to stabilize, ensure that we can stabilize the educational program and not allow unforeseen special education costs to require destabilizing cuts to the rest of the program. If you recall back to the fiscal 24 year, the swing in unanticipated special education funds exceeded $2 million. The law allows this fund to currently be at $1 million. We are requesting an additional $300,000 this year to get up to $950,000. We had originally asked for the full $1 million. However, the way we wrote the policy hard-coded the cap at $950,000. So I will be coming back to both the school committee and the select board to revise the cap to align with the actual letter of the state law, which is 2% of our net school spending, which right now is a little bit more than $1 million. Even that is not sufficient to necessarily withstand the full volatility in this cost center, so we think it is very important to ensure this fund is fully funded. We are planning to use right now about $491,000. The fund is allowed to be used for unforeseen and unbudgeted costs. We fully acknowledge that it is not ideal to rely on the stabilization fund for costs that are known but aren't able to fit within their operating budget footprint. However, next year is the most critical year, the last year of our market adjustment contracts. And as I mentioned before, we don't believe we can find additional reductions without starting to cut into core student programming. So we believe that the fund is designed also for such circumstances. As I explained in the cover memo that I sent you all yesterday or late Tuesday night, we actually are cautiously optimistic that we have other sources of revenue that will mitigate the need to rely on the fund at this level or if at all. Namely, the federal government, Congress, has actually come to bipartisan agreement about funding Title IIs, 3, and 4 at level service level for fiscal 27. The administration had previously attempted to cut that funding line item this year, and we expected them to attempt to cut it for next year, so we did not budget for that. So that is funding that is not within our revenue assumptions, and that was late breaking, happened on Friday. In addition, the governor proposed a budget yesterday that includes full funding of circuit breaker, including the transportation component. And so that could be an additional $125,000 that is also not budgeted. It's not for sure, because it's the beginning of the state budget process, but having the governor's commitment and proposing that is a good sign. And then additionally, I've been working with state officials around additional other sources of funding around out-of-district special ed tuition, which could yield $300,000 to $400,000 if successful. But we have not baked any of that into the operating budget assumptions, since none of that is yet firmly secure. Lastly, we are cautiously optimistic that we will continue to receive tuition credits from our 2 special education collaboratives. This year we received about $60,000 between the 2 of them. But again, that's a year-to-year decision based on the revenue and financial picture of each of those collaboratives. So to be conservative, we don't bake that assumption in because we don't really know what the level is. You take those 4 different sources of funding together, and it is more than the $491,000 that we are trying to rely on here. But again, we wanted to be transparent and conservative in our approach. You might ask why $491,000? Where did we come up with that number? That is the amount of growth above the 2.5% level, and we thought that was a fair way to assess what would be reasonable to rely on the stabilization fund for, because again, we think it's reasonable to absorb the standard level of inflationary growth. But as we've talked about at quite a bit of length. Special education costs are notoriously volatile, and the upward pressure far exceeds inflation. Hence, again, the reason for the Special Ed Stabilization Fund. So that is the big picture. We're obviously at the second box here. We've submitted the budget to you, and we expect obviously to have a good discussion tonight, and I'm sure you will bring us back for some additional discussion potentially before it moves to the select board and before it moves to the town meeting in March. So with that, we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So who wants to start first? George? We'll start with Mark.
Thank you, Beth and Julie, for the quick presentation, great level of transparency throughout the process, and all of your hard work. There's a lot of moving parts that come to doing this. And gratitude to the school committee as well for the level of rigor that they brought to the financial impact of this. They're looking at this at 2 levels deeper than we're looking at it, and I come into this discussion with a lot of confidence that they've done their job very well. I'm not a fan of the use of the stabilization fund in this way. I would rather you just, I hope things break our way and everything and it's not needed. I would just ask you not to make a habit of using it in this way. I agree it's reasonable, but given the $2 million swing that you just mentioned, I would really prefer that we keep that fund for truly unforeseen costs, because we know we know we'll need it at some point. So I get it, but let's not make a habit of that, because it would be too easy every year to do some similar reasonable math, and it just doesn't feel appropriate. All that said, I support this budget. I support the $300,000 add to the stabilization fund. I think you have found the right balance of responding to this moment. We were very clear with you last year that the level of growth last year could not be some new normal, and I think I personally feel heard on that. I think you all have done a really great job cutting right to the level of potentially impacting the services that are what are so much of the value of this town that brought us here, that keeps us here, that keeps us on life. So all good, and it's been very encouraging to see to see Tier 2 get less and less painful over time. I know that's not likely to continue all the way down to 0, but it's gotten quite a bit better, just over these recent weeks since we've been seeing it. So I had the benefit of seeing this 2 nights ago, and have had a chance to review and don't have any questions. Just gratitude for the work, and I think the one thing I want to point out as well. The work you've done at the state level, at the administrative level, last year to get extraordinary relief and get reimbursements, often more reimbursements than were planned, the level of advocacy that you bring at that level today, and getting grants and things like that, that was one of the strengths of bringing you to this position, and it's really bearing fruit in hard dollar ways. And so just thank you for your hard work on those fronts. That's all I have.
Alan?
Thank you. I think where you've been able to get without fundamentally impacting the quality of education is nothing short of remarkable. So congratulations to you all for getting there. It's not easy to get to where you got, especially given some of the challenges that face such a complex budget as the school budget. So I want to echo Mark in my thanks to all of you and all the work that you've done. Again, I've had a chance, Mark and a few of us were here the other night to go over this, so I'm pretty well versed at this point. So just one point, the one thing that I really dislike is the activity fee. However, I know that it's fundamentally necessary as well. And I want to echo some comments that were made at the school board meeting, where we just need to make sure that the people that need these waivers actually get them, because they're the ones that really don't have advocacy. Yeah. So, well done. I appreciate all your hard work. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. It's always very thorough and detailed as usual. You know, every year's the budget, the school budget in particular, is always a heavy lift, and this year it was extraordinarily heavy, I feel. And, you know, I think you did an excellent job cutting 4 percentage points from the MOE, and you certainly went into the details and figured out, you know, what we could realistically afford, which is great. So I was here Tuesday as well, so a lot of my questions have been answered. I just had some questions like, so for the federal grants, the 695, like how much of that is at risk, if any?
So, based on what we know now, none of it is at risk, because Title I is being proposed, it's a bipartisan, as we understand
Okay.
it, it's bipartisan at this point, so the biggest risk was Title II, III, and IV, smaller grants, but that is included in the package at level funding. Title I is actually getting a small increase, and did IDEA also get an inflationary adjustment? But we
level
always
fund it.
budget level fund, but,
So the funds that, the grant funds that the budget is reliant upon are the large, approximately just under $700,000 special ed grant and the Title I. So we did not count on the other lesser titles, which, not lesser in dollars,
Right.
to about the tune of $45,000 to $50,000, so.
Okay, but the 695, as far as you know, we're good with that?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It would be pretty catastrophic across the country if those grants got cut.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay.
The largest being the special ed grant, and the smallest of the two being the Title I math, targeted math enrichment, is
Mhm.
how Bedford uses that, those
Okay.
funds.
All right, so my other question was about upside. You already addressed that, that's not baked into the budget. So if things, you know, go our way, it's potentially, you know, the upside will make it a little bit easier to manage, which is great. You know, with the tiers, the tiers 1, 2, 3, is that, like, how do you, are you gonna execute them consecutively, or?
So they're gonna be, I actually did inform staff yesterday about the timeline and process by which we anticipate executing the tiers. They're actually gonna happen simultaneously because though Tier 1 doesn't involve layoffs, it does require reallocation. And
Right.
so we're staging we're trying to optimize voluntary transfers, so that requires posting positions that we need to fill, and then depending on who fills those positions, there may be a backfill of the person who moves from one position to another, or not, if it ideally comes from somewhere we need to reduce in. And then we're gonna save the reduction decision until after, you know, in a couple of waves, so that we can hopefully minimize the amount of involuntary transfers, and then ultimately the reductions that are gonna be layoffs. But that's happening a little later into right around town meeting, because we are hoping over the next 2 months that we can pick up some additional information around voluntary resignations or retirements that might open up spots for people to land in.
Right. I think the fees are a good solution. I mean, it was addressed last year with the buses. So in terms of, like, come July 1, will they be implemented? So it's an
Yeah.
inflow.
We haven't worked out the operational aspects, but we anticipate probably reaching out in the summer ahead of the school year to families who want to just pay the all-access fee right up front and get it over with. And I would anticipate a good chunk of families will do that, because families that have 3 sport athletes already know that their kids are going to be in the musical. It's just that
Right.
it's, what we had discussed with the school committee around particularly the lower level fee for students who may be less engaged and maybe just trying to figure out whether they will or participate in a club, that we would ensure that kids stick with a chosen activity before we levy the fee. So I think there will be some sort of grace period, and then probably midway through the fall, we would sort of look to see who has or has not paid and who is participating, and then ask nicely for the fee, and
Right.
probably do the same again in the spring, we haven't quite worked out the details yet, but that's.
Yeah,
what we're
my
thinking.
office is gonna be working on this spring, and the goal will
Okay.
be to over-communicate and be on the early side so people know what to expect, and hopefully we'll have it's never a popular thing, but hopefully it will be a smooth and effective rollout.
Yeah. And we anticipate to directly inform families. They probably should know that they're eligible, but because the sort of way that the state certifies whether someone is eligible for free and reduced lunch is through participation in state support programs. But we will communicate directly to families to say, please know you are already eligible for fee waiver. Please sign up for whatever you want. And then we will have the confidential fee waiver process apart from that for families who might have circumstances that are not certified by the state, but a particular circumstance that makes it difficult. And we plan to keep the burden very minimal. It's sort of honestly an honor system, and we have a general sense based on our fee collection for big field trips in terms of what the proportion should be. So I don't anticipate problems with that because we've done it already. We historically have done that for these other large fees.
All right. So it's good to hear the state willing to commit to the state circuit breaker reimbursement.
The governor has been willing, so that's a good sign. We have yet to hear from the Senate and the House, but because our representative, Ken Gordon, is actually a co-chair of the Education Committee, I anticipate that we will have strong advocacy in the House, and I also know some of the Senate leaders. So.
All right. So my last question was just about the stabilization fund. So we have $650 in now, right? We're gonna put 3 back in and take, say, 5 out. So that's a balance of, say, $450. If we needed some for 26.
So right now, we are, if you recall, the committee did approve up to $350,000 of potential draw on the stabilization fund for this year. We right now, as of Tuesday evening, our deficit for this year is $216,000. So that is currently earmarked to be taken from the stabilization fund. But if you recall from last year, we actually made quite a bit of progress from quarter 2 to quarter 4. So we're hopeful that we can close the gap through other cost-saving measures.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to last year, we are also going to be advocating for supplementary fiscal 26 funding to close the gap of the same circuit breaker shortfall that hit us this year that is supposed to be budgeted for next year. And that would almost close the gap entirely. You may recall that happened last year. At the last minute, the legislature did take some fair share extra dollars and allocated it to circuit breakers. So we were able to close the gap that we had by an additional $300,000 last year. So we're not resting on our laurels here, but it is possible we could be close to the edge if we don't get the $300,000 fill up, right? So
Right.
as Mark said, we would like to leave as much of that for unforeseen. But we also feel like it's a responsible use to at least be transparent about the potential to use it next year in order to avoid more destabilizing reductions.
Can I add something very quickly about the experience this year? We have actually had the types of truly unforeseen special education costs in excess of the $200,000 reliance.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely fit the criteria. So although we planned ahead to budget with those funds, we were on a track to have a lower budget than anticipated, than planned, until we had these truly unforeseen expenses that absolutely fit the profile. So if that, we too do not like operating this way. This is not
And we didn't, the only reason we're not, it's around $430,000 of unforeseen expenses, and the only reason that our draw is only at 216 is given the cost control measures and that we put in place, so we are able to offset some of that with salary savings, operational cost savings, and the aforementioned collaborative tuition credits helped us mitigate our special ed transportation So we're level, I think we're on budget
Yeah.
for that. But only because those tuition credits came in. So as I said, we don't count on those because the level of those tuition credits is dependent on how well the collaboratives do financially and board action on the part of collaboratives. So
Sorry, I might have missed it, but what was the unforeseen expenses?
about $430,000 so far this year.
What were the,
So
Out
the
of district tuition.
move-in cost for a student on an IEP, a settlement that doesn't go our way, an assignment from DESE saying that Bedford happens to be responsible for a student, even though we may not think so.
By unforeseen, we mean the students had not been enrolled with Bedford. They have come to us in these other ways that we would have absolutely no way to plan for.
So that's it. I appreciate all the detail, anytime. Thank you.
George.
all right. Well, first, appreciate you guys for coming in. I appreciate the thorough details that you provided in your presentation in the packet, and, obviously, looking very closely to bring the budget within guidance as best as possible. A couple of questions is, the stabilization fund, I'll echo similarly to my peers here that I understand your assessment, it falls under the description, but I think at the time when we formed the fund for special education use, stabilization just doesn't quite feel like the intent that was initially how it was formed, almost kind of like a fund that's there to help close gaps on an annual basis. So certainly I hope it doesn't become a habit that we're constantly dipping into it, but I understand unforeseen special education, if that's truly the case, is why this is being used, then that makes sense.
Yeah.
The fleet consolidation, it helps now, but with your plan to change the starting times in fiscal year, in school year 2027, does changing it now going to have an impact on that in 2 years?
Well, actually, we had a discussion with the bus company, and we are still in negotiations, but they have agreed to consider a rate reduction in lieu of having to reroute twice. So we are achieving most of the savings through conversation and negotiation rather than actually doing a reroute for that reason, so as not to do it twice. And I would say that fall 2027 is still a ways off, and it is an active discussion as to what will happen with respect to school start times. So the school committee will be getting an update on that in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. And then the FTE reduction you mentioned earlier, I just want to be clear, so is that baked into the current $52 million or no?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Yes.
For the fee, the revenue fee, what was the anticipated revenue again, based on?
About 300,000.
And then have you factored in the potential variability? where
We already
you
baked
may
in an
not get
estimate for
reimbursed
fee
or
waivers.
reimbursement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, both fee waivers and family caps, because, and we were also extremely conservative. This is a first-time launch.
Right,
We do not want to be reliant on fees that don't materialize.
right.
So we were very, very, very
Okay.
cautious about
Okay.
that.
Right.
So we should say we're hopeful that we might collect more than that estimate, which would then also offset our need to rely on the stabilization fund. But in both our assumptions around the revenues coming into the operating budget and the fees, we are really trying to err on the side of being conservative and transparent about the potential use for the stabilization fund. Because we could have very well have just sort of assumed that all these things will break our way and then say we had to use the stabilization fund, but we wanted to be transparent about what we know now in terms of costs, so that it isn't a surprise that we overrun into the stabilization fund. Although, again, asterisk, there could be unforeseen expenses next year that, we would have to eat into that too. But we're trying to err on the side of a realistic and transparent assessment of what the operating budget really can be, and hopefully come out ahead, as we are. Actually, this year and last year, we're coming out ahead on the operating budget side when you set aside special ed. But we've talked about wanting to have sufficient running room, so we're not constantly the pressure on our academic staff in particular isn't so tight, which it has been quite tight. So.
And then looking at the grant revenues, again, these estimated numbers are what are being used, baked into that number, correct? And just question is, it seems like there was always a hate crimes prevention grant in the prior 3 years. How come there's none this year?
So every year it is a competitive process. We have been successful each year in achieving it, but it is a competitive one-time grant. Honestly, it's pretty unusual for us to get it 3 years in a row. So we don't bake any of those competitive grants into the base.
Okay.
Just the grants that are baked in are the so-called entitlement grants based on our census data and our population and the formulas that have been in place for many years. And but the competitive ones, it's really just, and a lot of the competitive grants allow us to have a pilot of something. They're not all, they're usually supporting something above and beyond. So it would not be something that we would bake in at this stage.
But do we anticipate receiving it?
I don't know about, I don't know if the governor even proposed to fund the program this year, and I would be, I mean, we will try, but the case that you have to make to win the grant is to say that you've had problems with hate crimes or by acts of bias in your community. So in some ways, I hope we are not eligible because we've addressed the problem. But the grant this year is going to fund some of the work of the Anti-Hate Bias Task Force and has provided a little bit of offset on salary because we were able to offset some planned expenditures on stipends with the grant when we got the grant. But it's not something that can be relied on. They're notoriously fickle about these types of grants. So I used to administer that grant at DESE. So.
No, I agree with you. I hope we don't need the money nor have to use it.
Yeah.
Just, the current environment, who knows. I did watch the school committee meeting earlier this week. I would say, you did a great job highlighting all the state efforts you've done to try to assess extra finances for the town. You didn't quite put on that same show here, but I would encourage you to do so at the town meeting.
Yeah, I did. I think I mentioned very quickly in my presentation, but yes, by the time of town meeting, I hope some of these things will actually be solid. At which point we can be more definitive about what is known in terms of the draw on the stabilization fund. One of those efforts is going to be very close to the wire, and it still doesn't. I'm still not sure exactly what form it will take. So, this year, I've already talked to Town Manager Hanson. I have asked for the opportunity to do an affirmative presentation of the budget. You may have seen the video that we released as part of the public hearing on Tuesday. We will either continue to promote that video or actually develop potentially a modified one. We might even do a series on specific topics. What is the stabilization fund, right? And there may be what efforts are underway. What can you do to help? Call Ken Gordon and call Jason Lewis, call Governor Healy, right, to support X, Y, or Z. So in the run-up to town meeting, we anticipate doing a little bit more public engagement than we did last year. And at town meeting, Matt and I have already talked about allowing the school committee to do an affirmative presentation prior to the question and answer process.
Yeah, and I think that would be helpful for the town to understand better. I don't have any further questions.
Okay, great. Vincent, do you have any questions?
Hi, thanks, Superintendent and your staff. They tried to develop a budget proposal. They tried to get it very close to the financial guidelines without impacting the education quality. And I do agree, education should be our top priority for the town, and we should maintain enough funding, to maintain, even improve the education. If we do, try to maintain the 2.5 guideline, we as a town, I think we should really look for efficiency, somewhere else. But definitely, thanks for the effort. I also have questions surrounding the stabilization fund. Right now, you're budgeting 450 something, 90-something K for the budget. But you're also expecting additional funds might end up not using that fund. What happens if all other funding sources pan out, actually be able to get it? Is this stabilization fund will be used?
No,
Like,
so
yeah.
as we are this year, we wouldn't touch the stabilization fund until the end of the year, once everything has settled, and then we would ask, I forget if it has to go to the select board for a transfer.
Yeah.
Instead of going, last year, maybe recall, we had to go to town meeting for it ended up being $475,000. It was estimated to be 1.5 million at one point. But there was a finance committee reserve fund transfer that was authorized by the town. The stabilization fund is authorized by the select board according to Mass state law. And so we will wait till the very last minute to see how much, if any, we need to draw on. So this year, we're hoping to keep that, under 350,000 for sure, but as low as we can go. And then next year again, if the additional funds materialize and other unforeseen expenses don't materialize, we would, minimize the request and hopefully not use it at all.
The funds carry forward.
The funds are sitting in, they don't need to be reappropriated every year. They're sitting in a stabilization fund for emergency purposes.
Okay, but if that, actually I have a suggestion, just in terms of messaging, right? That messaging, like right now, as is, it seems like people actually already plan to use that fund. And, right, and can you just, instead of, as part of the process, just list all additional funds, even though with a quotation mark that says they are not final, there's a risk involved.
Yeah.
But if they didn't pan out, then you just ask for to use the stabilization fund.
Yeah.
That way, I think we'll stick to the spirit of the stabilization fund, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's similar to the point George just made. I think from a presentation standpoint for the town, we could juxtapose, because it's in a text-heavy memo to you all separate from that 491 number in the main document. I think when we present it, I will think of a visual way to say, here's the potential draw and here are all the sources of funding. Again, this was a choice to be transparent. We could have just assumed that some of these things would come in and then later on say, oh, it didn't come through, we need to use the fund. But we, maybe in retrospect we were overly conservative, but we would rather be transparent about the potential need to use it, knowing that these things haven't been confirmed yet. But literally last week, when we went to press on this, we didn't know about Title II, 3, and 4, and we didn't know about the governor's proposal. Those two things happened on Friday after we had printed. So we probably could go back in now and back those out and lower that number, but I think if we present that appropriately the way that you said, we can show the town that these are the funds that we've secured since the approval of the school committee budget, which means that our thinking on the reliance is going to be lower, although between now and then something else could occur with respect to projected special education costs that might swing it the other way, right? So
one way that I look at it is, and I don't want to hark back to the COVID times, but we were very, very clear that the Bedford's dollars would be the last dollars spent. And that applies to the stabilization fund as well. We will seek grants, we will seek alternative fundings, and that's what happened during COVID, and the town emerged in great condition. And the relief dollars were spent first, and the local dollars were spent last. But it is good to be
that's
prepared.
definitely appreciated,
Yes.
Yeah, it's just my opinion, from just a presenting messaging point of view, right? It seems like during budgeting process, you're already planning to do the stabilization fund. That's not the spirit of the fund itself. But if you're listing additional sources with certain risk, as long as you specify, and if they don't pan out, that's exactly why you can come to the stabilization fund, ask for additional amount.
I mean, as you're talking, I'm looking at the page where it says the revenue tier, and we probably could have very easily added revenue potential, you know, this.
Yeah.
At the time we wrote this up, though, when we first presented, we were pretty sure Title II, III, and IV were dead, and we had no assurance that the governor would come through with full funding on the circuit breaker. And the other state funding that I'm pursuing was not, actually hadn't come to, like, didn't exist. That work happened.
Okay.
But I think in the future, and probably for this town meeting, I will just update that page visually at least, even though the bottom line number that the town will be voting on is still the same. But to say that the likelihood of using the stabilization fund is much lower now because X, Y, and Z have come through. So thank you for that feedback. That's very helpful.
Sounds good. Thanks. That's all. Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm up. So first off, I'll just say thank you very much for all you guys have done from a staff perspective as well as a school committee perspective. I think when we started this year, I know the 2.5% target was a shock, to say the least, and especially considering where the maintenance of effort levels were. You know, I'm very impressed and very pleased to see how we've worked together, how you guys understood the situation of the town on a financial level, and then really took that to heart and made kind of appropriate cuts to maintain the level of education that we cherish here in Bedford, while also taking into account the fiscal stability and long-term financial considerations for the town. So we're not running headfirst into a wall with overrides starting next year. So I think very much appreciate kind of all you guys have done with that. A lot of my comments or questions have already been addressed. I think in particular the Special Ed Stabilization Fund. When I saw the initial presentation to the school committee, that was probably my biggest concern. I appreciate very much how you guys have framed this. I think one thing that gives me comfort is over the last 2 years, your projections have been conservative as you would want to be in municipal financing, and then you've come in under that. So I think that's helpful, and particularly being able to highlight kind of what you're doing even with this year's budget of the 350 already down to 216. I think will also be kind of a helpful guidance of past performance, demonstrating that whilst it doesn't necessarily equate to future performance. That said, I would be curious, kind of looking at future performance, realizing that, you know, next year is probably not going to be significantly better in terms of the guidance that we're able to give. It's probably going to be in the 2.5 range again, just given where we are with potential overrides and so forth. And don't quote me on the 2.5, it may be different. We need to look at that and see where we come out. But I guess the question is, if we're in that spot of still 2.5, and we also know free cash continues to fall, right? This year, we're somewhere in the range of 12 million. Last year, it was 25 million. Who knows where it's going to be this next year, because we know things continue to shrink. So being able to enhance, if you will, the stabilization fund, refund the stabilization fund, if that's a phrase, is going to be challenging. So I'm just curious how you guys are thinking about that, realizing those trends are coming. Would you be able to talk a little bit about that in terms of what we'd be looking at for coming years, realizing it's a bit of crystal ball?
Yeah, so I think one thing to acknowledge is we are going into, if you can believe it, negotiations with our major unions for fiscal 28. So that is a wild card there. That said, if you recall the declining enrollment chart, we are already looking ahead to continuing the targeted and gradual right sizing, and have already identified some potential reductions for future years that will hopefully not be noticed by students with respect to services, because as we have fewer students, we can still provide the same services with less staff. I think around the stabilization fund, We are hoping to ensure that we preserve as much flexibility there. If we are successful in some of the advocacy for additional revenue, I'm hoping we can refill our own fund for the first time, maybe rather than asking for it to come out of free cash. So I would have to work with Matt in terms of the actual maneuver, but it would probably, I think it fall back, if there was actually a surplus, it would fall back to free cash, but we would ask for the town to put that surplus
That's
into
my
the
understanding.
stabilization fund. But that would be our goal, which is to use our surplus to fund our own stabilization fund. But I'd also want to remind this committee about the discussion that we started last year around what we're colloquially calling the Burlington model, which is the understanding that like utility costs, like benefit costs, the state actually controls and sets the rates. So on the town side budget, we set aside what we call fixed costs, and Matt Hansen doesn't have to justify how to cut everything on the town side to cover those costs. What we typically do is set those costs aside and then determine what the guideline is for the departments, which this year was 2.5. What Burlington does differently than Bedford is they include the special education, out-of-district, and transportation costs in that fixed cost set aside. I think they call them accommodated accounts. And then all departments, including the school department, share in the exercise of what's left. Right now, in the current structure, the school department is expected to bear the full burden of that fixed cost, and is given the same share of the pie, 2.5, same instructions, without the benefit of having the fixed cost removed. It is not, that is where the stabilization fund comes in. And that is why, I will continue to argue, though it is not ideal, the planned use of the stabilization fund to absorb extraordinary increases above 2.5 is legitimate. It is legal. The statutory language says unbudgeted or unforeseen costs that would otherwise require destabilizing cuts to other school services. So we are precisely in that realm. I feel strongly that the school department should not be viewed as somehow not doing what it should do if we have to rely on the stabilization fund, even in a planned way. However, we would prefer not to. So if we aren't interested in making the structural shift to a Burlington model, I would want the town to understand that having the stabilization fund is not a luxury or some sort of budget adjunct, but is a necessity for appropriately managing the school side fixed costs in order to prevent destabilizing reductions. As we've talked about before, a single placement can be $350,000, and we're navigating some of those as we speak. In order to ensure that we are serving all of our students well and not having, pitting anyone in town versus school or special ed versus general ed, McKinney-Vento versus general ed, the stabilization fund is precisely designed to allow us to manage the volatility which is inherent to the business. So it's either a fully funded stabilization fund with the understanding that the usage should be expected and potentially planned for, or a recognition from the town around the fact that these fixed costs are not within the school department's discretionary control. That's something that I ask for the town to work with us on, because otherwise the general education and broader program suffers, and the impact impacts the whole system.
Yeah, and I think that's something that there's an opportunity there to consider once we get through kind of town meeting and budgeting. I think in particular, the transparency of showing that to highlight kind of to the town what's the true level of growth, and also that we're not having a year where a $2 million influx comes in and now all of a sudden that's baked into the base. So it kind of goes both ways, right? And I think that's where generally I've thought a lot about this special ed stabilization fund cost. And I think that's where, given all of the conservative nature of your budget, given the potential inflows that may never transpire, but there's a percentage level to it, I think it's a risk management
Yeah.
tool of using 1% of your overall budget to kind of manage the flux so that you're not showing that you're
Yes.
increasing exponentially, and we're building that into the budget for future years, and having town
Right.
meeting ask, why is
Right.
the schools out of control, versus at the same time also not under budgeting and
Right.
assuming a less than conservative spot, and then
Right.
coming in and saying, oh, well, we missed it because things didn't break our way. So I think I like how, I don't like the approach, but I appreciate how you're approaching it this year in terms of, as a risk management tool, given the large volatility. And then I think the one thing I'll just say, to a plug for whoever's listening, is I think this is also a place where, you know, if we can delay the town meeting, I think
Yes.
that's where we can potentially help our fiscal situation regardless, across the board, because we'll be able to have more refined budgets, so we don't have to put as much conservative nature
Right.
into the budget, and which will impact our free cash in the future and so forth, but it allows you to budget more effectively. So I think that's, you know, to me, something else that's on the docket for this year's, or warrant, I should say, for this year's town meeting, that I think will be important to help us over the long term.
Like, I don't know if we even know what the health insurance increase is yet and what Matt has baked in on the fixed cost side, right? But
It's usually double digit.
I know, but we're,
Yeah.
you know, we're guessing and hoping it comes in lower
Yeah.
than the guess. I think the last thing I would say about the point you've made around, we could, I think, make the case that we need the $491,000 in our base, because we know these expenses, these are part of the foreseen expenses, and the 37% increase in special ed tuition costs is not something we have discretion over. So give it to us, and people might be upset about what would be a 4% budget, but if the expectation is that we're going to cut to absorb it, then everyone in the town needs to understand that the general education and broader educational program will suffer to absorb that. If people understand, okay, you need it and we're going to give it to you, it's now built into the base. If the other stuff materializes, we will now have padding, if you will, which, you know, probably would be nice, but it's not as transparent, I think, to say that this is an extraordinary increase that we don't think is fair to just put into the operating budget. Or the other way, which is we could just take it out of just hope that the revenue side comes through, and then when it doesn't, it looks like we are not well managed. So I do appreciate the discussion tonight in terms of how to balance the framing so that the revenues that might be anticipated are recognized, but we just didn't want to hide anything with respect to padding the base, if you will. So that was the case, if you recall, 2 years ago with literacy, where we were explicit that we didn't think the literacy should be baked into the budget. At the end of the day, the committee actually approved it baked into the base, which we appreciate, but we were suggesting a finance committee one-time transfer because it was a one-time expense. So we're just trying to be transparent about the fact that certain expenses are not part of the broader base and are based on the extraordinary escalation in this given year.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I appreciate the transparency on that. Two other kind of different questions. One, in terms of, I noticed that the general ed transportation was increasing quite, or almost double digits this year. What is the driver behind that? And
Well,
beyond
that is
the
what we've now negotiated. So in the maintenance of effort, it's going up high. In the tier 1 reduction, you see that cost because we're negotiating on replacing the rates. Julie can speak to sort of the general construct of these multi-year contracts, and they're not always steady in terms of where they put the increases.
so it's more a relation of just where we are in the contract, or?
Yes, and you did mean general, right?
Yeah,
We also
yeah,
have
I know
very
special
big
ed
there.
transportation is
which is
very
a
complicated
collaborative
and,
formula
yeah,
based on
so,
usage 2 years ago. It's
yeah.
twist up your,
No, I was
yeah.
looking at more kind of the simple
yeah, you're.
buses going around, why is
So,
it going up
as
so
you know,
much?
we bid out our bus contract with a 3-year with 2 optional years to renew. that structure tends to concentrate the highest rate increases in year 3 because they want to keep them down for the optional years, and they want to keep them down for the first year. So, you know, it's a little bit of a,
I see.
Yeah.
So as we're looking at recontracting, I guess with a 3-year contract and you kind of get that bump, is there an opportunity, is it always going to be kind of a total cumulative growth that comes out with that? Or if we went with like, say, a 5-10-year contract, is that, do you wind
You're
up
gonna last you
saving
longer than
more?
3 for
well, only with permission,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, can I chime in real quick? Are we, what was the word I had in mind? Are we, like hostage to Bedford Charter? Like,
I
explore
wouldn't-
Other charters
I
around?
wouldn't put it,
They
yeah.
are a wonderful
They are a great
partner. They
partner.
work with us regularly. They work with us very well. However, they are an independent company who has been the winning bidder in Bedford for decades.
So every year we do bid out to other
Yes.
bus companies
Yes.
besides Bedford
Those
Charter.
are advertised
Yes.
competitively. We have an open bidders conference.
Yeah. The marketplace is, there are historical patterns in the marketplace, and so we do not get more than one major bid typically. And many towns do not get more than one major bid. However, the Office of the Inspector General and the Operational Services Division is looking into the transportation procurement process in the state, I think particularly around special ed, but maybe more generally because it is an identified concern in terms of cost pressure on the public sector. So we do the competitive bid process, but when you only have one bidder and one bidder who's done a good job.
So you have-
Well, I guess that was my question for going more than 3 years of like, if
You're
you,
not allowed to have longer than 3-year contracts.
oh, you're not.
There are rules. You have to, the local boards have to provide permission. You need a vote to be able to do something different. It's governed by, the procurement law.
I
So-
see.
so
Okay.
3 years
That's-
with-
That's
There are
helpful.
flexibilities, but you have to
3
follow
years
the
with
rules.
2 renewal year options for a situation where there's really only one major bidder can amount to a 5-year contract, which is why they are working with us collaboratively to basically move the lower 4th year increase rates into the 3rd
Well,
year.
That's still ongoing.
It's
so we
still
haven't worked it
ongoing.
out.
Yeah.
But they understand why fiscal 27 is a particular issue, and they also are working with us because they prefer not to reroute twice. So there's a mutuality there to help us out this way. We can avoid that, the renewal option is something that we will firm up.
Got it. And then my final question, I think I know the answer in terms of trying to avoid destabilization, but the 6.6 FTEs sounded extremely specific. I'm wondering if you could just give a little bit of input into how that number was achieved.
So beginning in September, the leadership team began to identify where, if you recall when I came, I think November, we presented the BPS class size and caseload guidelines, which is a culmination of a year of work, which I promised last year. You might recall I said, give me a little time to work with the team to firm up particularly the secondary level of the secondary class size guidelines. So after the team did that work, we were able to have broader visibility into where we may have more staff relative to the number of students and where we might be able to find efficiencies. So through many, many iterations of taking a look at the numbers, having conversations, can we identify places where should a vacancy emerge, we don't need to backfill it because we can still meet all of the student needs. And we are, even though as staff know, because I wrote a memo to them yesterday, we're not at liberty to share the specifics yet because we are still hopefully waiting for some additional tier 1 opportunities. This is not a pulled out of the sky number. This is actually a line by line identified. We think we can do this. This is reasonable. So we went down to the 0.1 FTE. We identified places where, oh, this is, 0.1 FTE, probably we can absorb that, it won't impact student performance. Here's a 0.4, here's 0.6, 1.0 here. So it's the sum total of that process, and it is a detailed line by line, account by account specific process that we continue to adapt as new information comes available, which is why the numbers have shifted a little bit. We will be doing some additional planning with the instructional leadership team right after February break, and then right closer to town meeting is when we will start to implement the phases of accomplishing those reallocations or reductions. The hope again is to bring that number further down, but as you noted, I think it's probably unlikely that we can eliminate it entirely. However, I will say that when we started the process, we did have concerns that we would have to lay off professional staff, and right now, with no guarantees, but right now, at this point, we believe that no professional staff will be impacted by the layoffs. That's not to minimize the impact on the non-professional staff, but that is the type of work we're trying to do to minimize the destabilization of the staff team structures.
No, that's super helpful. I really appreciate kind of that insight, because I don't want people to think that in particular that it was just kind of a number to hit a budget or something. It was very clear. It's clear that you spent a lot of thought and a lot of time working through that, which is appreciated.
Well, and that's why you see in the revenue tier, we knew we had to, once we got down as far as we could, we tried to identify revenue sources, and that's where the stabilization fund planned use came in, because honestly, I just didn't feel I could justify further reductions without the stabilization. So that's again why I'm advocating and defending the planned use of unbudgeted yet foreseen expenses if we absolutely have to. But in the last week, we've gotten some more good news, so hopefully that will be lessened and eliminated by the time we get to the start of the fiscal year, or end of fiscal year next
Great.
year.
Excellent. That's all the questions I have. I'll go around one more time to see if there's anything else. Mark?
I mean, I have a curiosity. You don't have to address it now, but as you anticipate the next decade of declining enrollment until it's forecasted to level out, is that just year after year of continued, thoughtful, targeted, kind of organic reduction, or are there some steps on the way down there where things might get more interesting?
I think as it was discussed before, our middle school is predicated on a team structure, and that team structure is designed to support young adolescent educational progress, and as the term middle school connotes, it's the sort of transition between self-contained elementary classrooms and much more independent course taking at the high school. So it's a hybrid between the two. That structure is predicated on a certain number of teachers working with a certain number of students. We have been historically at about 200 kids per grade for the last decade or so, which makes for very nice 100 student teams, 2 teams per grade. If you look at the projections, we will be below 500 in a couple of years and then dipping down into the 400s. You can't maintain the same structure without having much smaller class sizes, which would be lovely, but then I also have to look my elementary teachers in the eye and say, they will say, well, why can't our classes be smaller? And elementary is a little easier to trim in a gradual way, because you can just divide the number of students by the number of teachers you need, and the structure isn't predicated on a grouping. So we are going to be thoughtful looking at those projections to see when we need to make some kind of structural modification. We will begin that conversation after February break, because there is a smaller class in the next year at the middle school that we are going to potentially try a structural shift that maintains the middle school model, maintains all the services that the students have, but more efficiently deploys our staff, and hopefully, in my view, improve actually student services, but that's something to be discussed. But we're looking at that, particularly at the middle school, the trajectory for that, Once you get to the high school, it sort of comes back to a little bit more fluidity. It's based on individual student course taking. We actually just negotiated a side letter with the BEA, the Bedford Education Association, around structures to allow teachers to pick up an extra class. So a typical high school teacher, for example, teaches 5 sections. If you pick up a 6th section, we can compensate you in a certain way. That prevents us having to look for a .2 teacher externally, or and we might be able to cover things more efficiently. And likewise, we also negotiated some protections for staff who want to voluntarily go part-time. So if you go down to .8 or .6 for a year because you just had a baby, or you have some family situation, but you can come back to full-time. So with that flexibility, we can be more, we don't have to necessarily work in 1.0 increments at the high school. So we are creating the structural flexibility to make sure that we can continue to accommodate what students need, but be a little bit more nimble in terms of how we deploy staff. And I hope that will help staff, because I think some staff would go to and we've had this happen, go part-time if they know they can come back full-time, and it will help us if it's in a pivotal year. So the other strategy that we're building in is the use of leaves. So families, staff have occasions where they want to take a year off, but they want to come back. And that might be the year we need to absorb something. We're working a few of those situations as we speak as well. So we're trying to build in the flexibility systematically so that we can continue to gently contract. And looking ahead at the structures that preserve what we think is educationally most important, planfully, so that it doesn't feel haphazard or sudden. It will be a year by year, but we are looking ahead multi-year to ensure that, and we're beginning to collect, as we look at retirement data, I'm anticipating, okay, when that retirement occurs, we might be able to reorganize in this way. So we've already done some of that preliminary work for fiscal 28, and we'll probably always be doing that a year or two in advance, as long as we are in this declining enrollment scenario, which we will be in for the next 6-7 years.
Cliff, can you just adding on to that, Cliff, can you remind me how is the enrollment projection generated? Is that by you? Is that by?
So Julie does some internal enrollment projections, but we also rely on the demographic data provided by NESDEC, the New England School Development Education Council or something. It's a third party.
It's remarkably accurate over time.
Yes,
right? It's kind of
Julie's
amazing to me that it's
internal
forward.
projections and NESDEC's projections have been very closely aligned. So they're, we need to, unless we get new data, we need to be thoughtful and planful about what the projections are saying. And so those projections say that within 6 years we'll be a 2,000 student district versus we were 2,500, above 2,500 when I started, 2,600.
I mean, like for town-specific, knowing the town-specific developments that are ongoing, for example, like, do we look into number one, aging population? What does that look like in Bedford in coming years? Number two, like with the MBTA zoning that, construction got approved, you see around town, there's a lot of duplexes, community that being built. If that Carlisle project over by North Road happens, that's supposed to be a lot of buildings.
So NESDEC does start to build some of that in, but the general research around these development projects is that it does not result in the kind of school age growth that people sort of think it will. We will obviously be responsive to that, but what I've been telling staff is good problem to have. If the reduction doesn't occur, then we won't have to make the harder decisions because we will be able to justify, the tax base will be bigger, presumably, and we will have the students to serve. So I would rather plan ahead for the forecast reduction and not have to do it. But the reduction has been bigger than even our forecasts in the last year or two. So it's better to be prepared.
One thing that may come into play, given that the changes, should say the real estate market change, the landscape of new housing options in town, on occasion, a town has to engage a demographer to really look at a forecast, which is different from a projection. A projection, which is what NASDAQ does and what we do internally, looks at the past to predict past patterns, to predict the next year and the couple of years after's patterns. But when there's enough change in a community, which in my opinion has not happened yet in Bedford, recently, you would need to take a different approach and look at a wider net and look at demographic trends and across the board. So it's important to keep in mind that sometimes the projection is not enough. You have to be in forecast, and I'm using those words intentionally.
And I would say that, let's say the birth rates start to come up or we have move-ins, it's a much happier circumstance to advocate for adding a kindergarten teacher because the class sizes are higher. And presumably, if that were the case, the tax base should be higher too, right? So I'd rather be in that mode of planning for potential reductions, but then being the happy surprise if we get to add a teacher, right? It's plan for the worst, hope for the best.
I mean, just to comment in conclusion, just as I reflect on your answer to my question, kind of looking out far, your response to Phil's last question about the nuance of these point ones and point twos, I think it was somebody on the school committee who said we're in the people business. And you do the business of people in a way that never loses sight of their inherent value. And that's a ton of moving parts, but you seem to be really good at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Alan?
Well said.
Tom?
No questions.
George?
No, just again, thank you for the work you've done. I'll make the comment as, I think to see you guys done a, fantastic job. I do hope, public opinion on school committee and budget management comes around. I think since you've joined, the structure that you implemented over the last year has been really helpful. So again, appreciation.
Vincent, anything else?
I don't have any, but there is another question from somebody else. I think it'll be answered, but it's good to take a look at.
Oh. The question is about whether or not the increased costs related to the Healthy School Hours change have been included in the budget. The answer is no, because one, there hasn't been a final decision about which option we would implement, and two, the change would impact FY28, which is precisely why the Healthy Hours Working Group recommended waiting till fall of 2027, which is FY28, because we wouldn't have been able to incorporate that type of dynamic information into this budget because of our early budget year. So the town meeting, as I understand it, might be moving town meeting back for next year, which will give us a little bit more solidity in terms of some of the real-time projections. But it was impossible to try to incorporate that and do the work to figure out the implementation. So that will obviously be a big part of the fiscal 28 budget, depending on school committee direction.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, I think just to close things out, you can see, for those that are detail-oriented in the agenda, we don't have vote. That's intentional because what we've typically liked to have done as a finance committee is bring all of the budgets together, see where everything's landing, and then kind of have a broader discussion. So we'll be doing that in a couple weeks after we get the select board budget next week. We've kind of gone through the others over the last couple weeks with CapEx included, and so we should be finishing that out. So I'll just close by saying thank you guys for, I would say, probably one of the smoothest budget processes we've had in my time on the finance committee. I think that it could have gone many different ways this year, particularly given the aggressive target that we had for the committee, and I really appreciate you guys taking that target seriously, understanding kind of the why behind why we did that and why we needed to make that change, and doing your best to get us to a place that's going to allow for a sustainable growth rate for the schools as well as for the town, and kind of hit our fiscal needs that we have as a town, just given that we have limited resources to work with. So thank you, guys. I don't know if there's anything else. Otherwise, we can let you guys go and we can get on to other business.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yours.
All right, so the next up is the model. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that right now or go into it. What I will say is Matt put a new model in, I believe last week or 2 weeks ago, for everyone to peruse. I think what will be most effective is probably to look at the model after next week, once we get the select board budget in, because I think once you get the 5 budgets plus the CapEx plus, well, I guess CapEx is mostly coming from free cash, so minimal impact there, but the 5 budgets, it really are going to be the kind of the key things that drive our thinking on that model. And you know, where I'm seeing it come in, I think we're going to be luckily in a good place relative to, we're not going to be skirting override territory this year, luckily. But, you know, we can wait and take a look at that in a couple weeks, unless anyone wants to talk about that right now.
I mean, if that outcome does come, that's not luck, that's our hard-nosed fiscal stewardship starting last year to
Right.
really pump the brakes on
Oh,
CapEx
exactly.
in particular, so deep.
Yeah, no, for sure. Vincent, did you have something?
Yeah, like, I remember asking something in the email, I couldn't open this model right now. One of the tabs about the real estate tax increase. I think there was a role for us, for this year's increase, and now we know, basically, right, and by November, the actual tax increase.
Where's the
It's good to review the numbers, so when we look at the model, I
I'm
think
looking for it myself.
give us a good sense, what the increase was last year. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a tab about the residential, don't know the tab name, it's about real estate tax increase over the years.
Oh, yeah, and just, is it something that we can update?
Just feel like a fiscal year 2026. Now we know, is there a number?
Yeah. Yeah, we can ask Matt to add that when he comes in
Yeah.
next week.
Cool.
I think he's kind of working slowly on updating the models, just given kind of where we are with,
Yeah.
and here it is. It's in FY27 models folder. And to that point, they announced at the select board meeting that there is a new finance director that they've hired, so hopefully this one will stay longer.
Does he live close by?
We shall see.
Did they, do they have, free cash from last year yet? You know, the 12 million, is that
I
a good number?
I think that's the estimate. I don't know that they have the official number yet. I haven't heard anything. I probably spoke out of turn by calling it 12 million because I just took 6 million for CapEx and multiplied by 2, but,
Hey,
so, and I know that whenever they were in, they said, oh, this is our estimate. We're not sure where it's not been certified yet, but.
yeah, right.
Actually, it's a different tab, whoever is showing that. What is it called?
I would say the best bet is probably just to email Matt directly and ask him to update it, or I'm happy to do so if you would send it to me.
Can you click on value? Maybe not different. Anyway, one with the tab. Oh, average, the one before that, average single family tax bill. I think that's very meaningful. We kind of see like a increase. Like it's good to feel the line for 2026.
Oh, I
Then
saw
it's around
that.
the top.
Yep.
The top line.
Yep.
Yeah. We should have all the numbers right by now.
Okay, let's email Matt.
Yeah.
Vincent, do you want to do that?
Okay.
Yeah, do
Okay,
you mind
do it.
doing that, Vincent? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Anything else on the model? I'm not gonna go around just because I feel like for the sake of efficiency. All right. Minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes, thanks to our trusty scribe, this week.
Do you have someone doing it today?
I believe so.
All right.
I think so. I don't know.
I'll email Amy. If not,
It's-
it's no problem.
I think they have someone that's going to start doing it, but I'm not sure when she is starting to do it.
All right.
Amy would probably be the person to ask, and or Autumn Legister,
Yeah.
who's Matt's.
Yeah, I'll leave
I
this.
mean, I reviewed both of these earlier today. There's not a huge amount of substance to them, so I certainly didn't see anything. And unless there's discussion around, I'd happily make a motion that we enter the January 8th minutes into the record.
All right. Motion to approve the January 8th minutes. We will go around. Vincent,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Tom,
Yes.
Alan, Mark.
Yes.
All right. January 15 minutes.
I also took a look at these. Unless anyone has anything they want to discuss, I would move that we enter the January 15th minutes into the record.
All right. Vote to approve the January 15th minutes. Vincent,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Tom,
Yes.
Alan,
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Awesome. Minutes are approved. Let's go to meetings attended. Vincent, any meetings attended?
No.
Okay. George?
No, I just called into the school committee meeting. That's all.
Same for me. I called into the school committee and then listened a bit to the select board on Monday night. I think they continue to work through some of the updates to the town charter. But I think that's one of the only remaining things that to me sounded like it was ongoing.
What about the warrants? Anything, the special timing, a lot of that stuff that didn't get discussed that was supposed to come back.
That's
right?
good.
That's all coming back.
Okay.
That's the charter stuff.
why
I mean, have you looked at the warrant?
Yeah.
Is that why, I was
it's-
gonna say, is that why it's
it's
like
huge.
so big?
Yeah.
Because most of that came over.
It did, yeah.
Have
So,
they talked about, like, do they have like a different approach to get through that?
it sounded like they're trying to kind of consolidate the time of the meeting and
Yeah.
then other things so that, and not do, on the time of the meeting, not do it like they started last year where it was like hold, where like then the times all kind of floated. It's either all up or all down is what I heard them say.
Okay.
I'm not going to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'm trusting that they have come up with a better way, so. Tom,
Went to school committee on Tuesday. Basically the same presentation as tonight.
Oh, but we had the fun video.
Oh, the AI video, yeah. It was informative. They had a video.
oh, he used AI to do that video?
I don't know. It
Yes.
seems so.
We don't have the budget for anything else.
Right. Or an intern or something.
I thought
That
maybe
was
a
pretty cool.
student helped. I was like, that's
It's like a
impressive.
guy, like an older guy's voice, so I'm pretty sure.
I think it was an AI voice.
But it was good. It was
AI
informative,
voices have come a long way. Yeah, I was impressed by it. It was very bite-sized.
Yeah.
It's just start respecting what the town needs.
Exactly. Alan, anything for you?
Same thing, we were at, school committee.
Mark?
I was also at the school committee meeting through the open budget hearing.
Saw you front row. So,
Well,
I was watching. You guys showed me up to actually come down in person. All right. We have one thing left on the agenda. It's awkward.
I don't know, I wouldn't mind going back to the model.
We have closed that portion of the discussion.
You know what, we could talk more about the school committee meeting.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn and seconded. Vincent?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Tom?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
Mark? No. I was going to say, that's amazing if we have